So I saw that Fed sent around the slides, but I will put them up here and share my screen. Here.
I will also add the link to the slides momentarily to this.
Okay.
Chat.
All right. So can you see that? Does that work?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is actually, I should actually have Michael Strauss up there. Michael.
Yep, I'm here.
He would join in and provide the SAC field of view, SAC info from the white papers. So we received 46 white papers total. 20 were on the White-FSD, the all sky, 10 of which were particularly about the cadence. 4 pertain to deep drilling fields, about 26 were related to mini surveys, and 3 relate to TO target of opportunities. So you can notice that those totals are more than 46. That's kind of because some white papers fall into more than one of those categories. Mm-hmm. So, of course, this question was, how should LSSD survey the sky? Every night for 10 years, we're looking at about 2.5 million visits, and we have the requirement to publish the expected observations 1 to 2 hours ahead. We have to schedule observations during bright time, dark time, and all kinds of conditions. And we want to maximize the efficiency of the telescope and don't do anything obviously wrong, but we also want to optimize science, and that's where we need the community help. So the timeline for the survey strategy, last July we issued the call. November was when the white papers were received. The submitted white papers are available on that link that is listed there at lsst.org. And this last week, the LSST Science Advisory Council had a meeting to review the white papers. In April, they'll have their final, they'll have their official recommendations for OPSIM investigations. And then at the end of 2020, or early 2020, the project will have run those investigations and deliver a set of simulations to the Survey Cadence Optimization Committee, the SCOC. So this is, we're not going to do a single simulation, we're going to deliver a family of simulations with a variety of analyses. In early 2021, the SCOC will send their recommendations back to the LSST Operations Director. Mid-2021, the project will deliver a baseline simulation of that initial survey strategy, and then obviously late 2022 operations start. The other thing to note is that the COSEP, that's the Community Observing Strategy Evaluation Paper, what used to be called the Observing Strategy White Paper, but has been renamed for obvious reasons, is ongoing. And so that's a place you can, it's a live document, you can always write up a science case and a metric way to evaluate OPSIM runs and put it into the COSEP. So out of those 46 white papers, there were 7 requests to vary the White-FSD footprint, either further north, so this was primarily motivated by gaining a lower extinction footprint, or into the galactic plane to study galactic variability, stellar variability or galactic structure, various things there, sorry. There were about 10 requests for different cadences of visits in the White-FSD. These sort of primarily focus on things like don't have longer visit gaps between particular filters, some specifications on rolling cadence, particular aspects of that. There were some talking about what filters to use for pairs of visits or for triplets of visits. And so these were the papers on cadence. And then there were 3 requests that relate to White-FSD in that they were all sky footprint mini surveys. So there was a white paper on doing high air mass visits, for doing differential chromatic refraction for AGN, a series of short 5-second visits over the whole sky, or trailed 1 to 15-second exposures, doing sub-second variability.
How did you know that was what I wanted?
The other white papers, we had 3 target of opportunity programs. 3 related to co-observing with Euclid or W first, and 4 white papers on the current or standard deep drilling fields. Then we had 11 mini survey suggestions where they were talking about following specific targets for a limited, intense period of time. 1 on the North Ecliptic Spur and 2 on just general northern coverage. So again, an interest in pushing some of the survey footprint further north. And then we had 6 papers on the galactic plane coverage, including 1 that was galactic plane as well, celestial pole. Then as far as that, we had specifically asked about the visit exposure times and the question of whether people preferred snaps or visits. Many people preferred 30-second snaps. This is because you get more efficient survey operation. But some still prefer 2 by 15-second snaps, sometimes in a limited area only. And this is primarily driven by things like white dwarf transits or studying rapid variability. We had 1 request for 22-second or 28-second snaps, 1 for mini survey 5-second visits.
The screen is not wide enough.
Sorry, excuse me. I had to bring a small child to the office. We had 1 mini survey that was looking for these trailed images. It's kind of interesting. So the upshot from this is that we had a series of families of simulations. So the overall amount of time requested was between 115 to 250% of the time we have available. And so this is one of the white papers introduced this Lynne sim tool. You can find this at the GitHub repository linked there. It's an unfortunate name. You can blame Phil Marshall. The idea is it distributes the number of visits over an area that you can specify. And so you can sort of say, if I have about this many visits to play with, which we kind of come down to certain ranges of numbers that we see we can get out of simulations, that you can distribute those over the sky and how you can distribute them over the sky. So the previous baseline gave you something that looked like what's on the bottom of the screen here. But if we just took the white papers that we received and sort of put them together into very general families, a preliminary assessment might give you these kind of new footprints. So this might be 2 families that we would start to investigate. So this is taking 95% of the visits out of a simulation that had snaps. And we can just the difference between the footprint on the left and the footprint on the right is that on the left, the white fast deep only extends up to +2 degrees, and on the right, it extends up to +12. The motivation for going higher on the right would be to move more of the visits to this low extinction region. And so these are some sort of generic families. We'd like to sort of do some simulations with these early on, and so that we can sort of see what the community thinks. The idea is, of course, this is going to be a process with the community and try and be as transparent as possible. All the OpSim runs from here on out will be done with the new feature-based scheduler. And this runs faster than the old scheduler, and it's more flexible, so we can configure it in more ways. Math will keep the previous metrics plus adopt new metrics from the white papers in COSAP. So in terms of the families of simulations, the SRD requirements must be met. So this means we do have to have 825 visits over about 18,000 square degrees. From the project, because of the difference between snaps and no snaps on data management requirements, we will do simulations with snaps and without snaps. And then from there, we'll do variations on the footprint. So we'll add and remove components, vary the wide, fast, deep. We'll do variations on the cadence within the footprint. So effectively like long-term rolling cadence or internight cadence. We'll do variations on the deep drilling fields. And like I said, we're really trying to keep transparency in this process. So intermediate stages of OpSim experiments can be released, but they should be understood as very preliminary, and they're not final. And again, the COSAP is a great place to provide additional feedback in terms of metrics and performance evaluations. So this is just the timeline up again, and I will leave it with that. So any questions can now ask to me and Michael.
Why don't we just take a pause and see if people do have questions? I have a number of things to add and embellish on some of the things Lynn said, but let's see what people might have in questions or comments at this point.
And if you cannot speak, you can send your questions on the chat and I will ask them on your behalf. Anybody has questions?
Lynn, you probably mentioned this, but I missed it. What fraction of the wide, fast, deep white papers suggested a rolling cadence of some sort?
Most of them, I think.
Well, there were certainly wide, fast, deep papers, which, well, I think they all had some kind of specification in general, but it might not have been strictly rolling cadence. Like, for example, one of the things that the desk asked for was no visit gaps longer than 15 days in the same filter. That's hard to do without some kind of rolling cadence, but they didn't specify a rolling cadence to use.
Yeah, I think very few of the white papers that really were asking for substantial amounts of things were specifically arguing against a rolling cadence, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so my question was the inverse. What fraction of papers came up with advocating a particular rolling cadence?
A fair number of them.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
that's
I
good.
mean, yeah, of course, everyone interprets rolling cadence a little differently, which is fine. Which is really to say that we're going to have to do a variety of experiments, and the OpSim will do a variety of different things, and we'll see how they work, rather than just going exactly with what any given white paper might have interpreted rolling cadence to be.
Hi, it's Phil here, Lynn.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Phil.
So, really interesting to see what people submitted, and also get an idea of what you're thinking of simulating. So, it looked like there was half a dozen different things to vary. So that could lead to a very large multi-dimensional grid of simulations. How many simulations are you thinking of doing?
Yeah, this is Lynn, go ahead and address that, and then I'll have some comments.
Okay. So I guess I would start with those two different footprints that I showed, and then running them with and without snaps, and that kind of gives you different distributions of visits. And I think that's sort of where we're planning to start, and then have those come out. And then from there, we'll start tackling the question of like, okay, how do we add rolling cadence for this footprint? So when you say how many simulations we'll run, by the end, I imagine there'll be quite a lot. But
Meaning
because
hundreds.
Yeah, because of the fact that the first thing that we run will not be what we want to actually do. So in those terms, there's a lot. In terms of like how many we might actually deliver to the SCOC at the end, that's a good question, and I don't know if I have a great answer. I think in some ways that'll depend a little bit on how things go on the way.
Lynn, would you agree with the following promise? We will have between 100 and 1,000 simulations that will belong to about 10 different families.
I think that's certainly reasonable order of magnitude, sure. Yeah.
So maybe I can comment a little bit. The job that the SAC has been given to, given the 46 white papers that we have and our assessment of them, to come up with a series of specific recommendations that will address exactly Phil's question. That is, what is the range of simulations to be done? As we were just talking about this question of rolling cadence, any given white paper will make specific and sometimes more or less focused recommendations on what kind of cadence or sky coverage they would like. But I think the synthesis that the SAC is working on is trying to figure out what is the range of different simulations that will cover the range of scientific questions that we think are addressable. One of the challenges here is first, as you said, as Phil said, the space of possible simulations to run is quite large. And as I understand it, and we had a lot of discussion about this at our SAC meeting, the rate limiting step is not necessarily just computer time to run n number of simulations, but rather the time for any given sort of crude understanding of what the simulation should do, trying to tweak the parameters to come up with something sensible. Lynne was showing her LinSim outputs that say, given the total amount of time available, here's a way to combine the different fields and the different numbers of exposures so that you're not asking for 150% of the available time, and that will be very useful in sort of trying to figure that all out. But that is certainly one of the key things to go. I see a few hands up, so let me stop. But I have a number of other things I can say. John, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, so could you talk about what the existing, like, say, pre-white paper baseline cadences, will they continue to have an existence, or, are we, and continue to be run? Because, it seems to me that, oftentimes people implicitly assume that things are going to be the way they were, and, a few people come up with a good idea, and on the other hand, everyone else is working on the basis of the old assumptions. So could you talk about the role that those have and those footprints and so forth and so on?
From the SAC's point of view, yes. I mean, there exists, default is not the right word, but there does exist a baseline which has allowed us to focus our thinking at some level. So, and as the OpSim has evolved, the details of what that actually looks like in practice have evolved so as well. So yes, I think those will continue to go forward. Various other things that have been suggested. So one of the rate limiting steps in my understanding, and Lynne and Zeljko will correct me if I'm wrong, is for any given vague understanding of, let's do rolling cadence this way versus that way, making that actually work in practice requires some real human thought, and that's a challenge. And then of course the computer time to actually run the simulations will take time. But the other rate limiting step is that once one has those simulations in hand, then you actually have to compare them, and that's what the metrics are for. But not all metrics that we would love to have exist within the MAF, and that will be developing those will be another challenge. Federica, go ahead.
Yeah, I had exactly this question. Lynne, do you have a sense that the people that submit a paper also wrote metrics or wrote enough information for you to write a metric that evaluates a cadence for the science that they aspire to do?
Well, everybody who wrote a white paper included something that we can turn into a metric. Whether or not that's actually addresses the science that they really wanted to do might be another question. And I think that's someplace where we have to probably have a bit more discussion with.
Right, and I think that will be a theme in the SAC report. We talked quite a lot about this, and there were concerns. A handful of the white papers actually came with real maps. They actually wrote the code. A modest number wrote things in enough detail that you say, yeah, that captures the essence of it. And others were increasingly vague. And frankly, some of the white papers didn't really have. It wasn't clear what the metric would be. That is, it's, here's an experiment to try and let's see what happens. And it wasn't necessarily captured in a metric. But I do see the development of those metrics as a major task for sort of both the project team and the scientific community as a whole. And I imagine that I suspect we'll have further discussions along these lines where we try to understand, well, hear more from the white paper authors on what they actually had in mind, and see if we can get some work in actually developing those metrics. I am a little bit worried that the team that will have all the work of running these simulations will also have the work of writing the metrics, and it can get a little overwhelming.
So if we think about it well enough and we plan it carefully enough, we can involve the science collaborations in the role of the people that would write a lot of these metrics, and that may be also something that Jenna and I may want to talk about to see if we can secure some funds or workshops or something to make that happen at some point.
Okay. Okay. Good. Let me think what else I wanted to say. So again, the SAC went through all 46 of the white papers, and our immediate output is a formal report which will be made public that describes what our recommendations for the next round of simulation should be, and that in practice will be an iterative. As we prepare that, we will have to iterate with the project team and no doubt iterate with some of the white paper authors where we said, I think this is what you meant, or does this get at the gist of what you had in mind? There'll be some of that. And let me just throw out an example. And John, I don't remember if you were a co-author on this white paper, but there were a variety of requests for low galactic latitude science, and one of them said, let's just do wide, fast, deep cadence at all latitudes, including low latitudes. And one of the questions that came up is does that may be better for variability science, for example, than what the earlier baseline was? But is wide, fast, deep the right answer? Is there a better answer? Can one justify it more than just saying, well, if the high latitude science gets this, should the low latitude science get this as well? And another related question that came up is that a number of the low galactic latitude white papers focused on the galactic bulge, and one of the questions was, what happens to the anti-centric direction, and what's the right thing scientifically to do there? Should it just be wide, fast, deep, or are there other ways to think about that as well? So I'll just throw that out as questions that we found ourselves talking about a bit. And the white papers covered a lot of scientific themes, but didn't answer every single question we might have asked. And John, I'll put you on the spot to see if you.
Yeah, I think that it would be very helpful to have sort of a specific set of questions, asking like what you would like to see the answers, what they are. Yeah. And then we could approach the collaboration, and then, if people are, serious, then this is the time that we could get a real, response figuring these things, right? Now that it would be clear that it would have a lot of meaning in the response as opposed to being, who knows what will happen, right? It's infinitely far away and no one knows what will be decided. In particular, to me at least, because the anti-center was in all the baseline things, I never thought about it very much. And now now other things are under consideration. So, what's the question? Well, I think that all the people who want to do star-forming regions and open clusters and this, that, and the other thing, those sources are all, at B less than 20 probably, or most of them are, and so forth and so on. But I don't, I'm not prepared to give an answer. But if you would give us a formal request, then that would finally give me something that I could push on people for, and I think we would get a very a valuable response to you, and that would be. I really welcome that.
Yeah. Okay. So I didn't expect a full cogent answer to an ill-posed question right away, but yes, that makes a lot of sense. And as we're going through that, there was a a series of questions. And again, I'm picking on you, John, as at low galactic latitudes, but there's other issues that come up.
I will confidently say that my 5-second paper will be the worst one, since I literally wrote it in a hotel room at my wife's conference the day of. And every day since then, I've thought of things. So, it was just to be sure that something was thrown on the fire, that, one set of short-second exposures might be valuable. The whole thing could happen in commissioning over a limited area of the sky, but I just wanted to turn something in. So if it looks shoddy, it was.
No,
but,
no, don't. I'm making no statements on shoddy white papers, but rather that there are additional questions that have come up, and we'll find ourselves asking about. Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to think if there are other things to say. Again, our nominal deadline for getting this report out to the public is April. Again, we have many pages of notes that which is the raw material that we're starting to put that report together. And I'm not sure there's much more specific to say at this point.
Michael, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if your report is going to include some sort of overall summary of the impacts on data management of the cadences that are proposed. So, for example, some of these are very fast, looking at snaps every second, every 2 seconds, and this would have an impact on our data processing. Right.
I mean, our immediate goal is to get recommendations for OpSim runs, and certainly one of the things that was in the white paper call was an assessment of whether, as it were, standard data processing would be enough, and there are some very specialized programs within the white paper's calls, and they basically say, get the data and we'll process it, and it won't be the data management's job. So that's a partial answer to your question. I think my understanding was that most of the white papers were asking for data that should be straightforward to process, and the most interesting exception is the question that Zeljko was asking at the beginning of this meeting, namely the crowded field photometry. So let me tie to that theme. There were, again, a lot of interesting white papers doing things at low galactic latitudes where the stellar density will be very high, and some of them were thinking static science questions. And if we're going to devote a significant fraction of LSST time to those data, we collectively should make sure that those data are processed in a meaningful way. And so
that certainly addresses issues of different algorithms to be run. But I'm thinking also of some of the proposals. I think Lynne presented one where there was a 2-second exposure at very high frequency, and this would have, even if it's still just using the standard algorithms and it doesn't require any change there, it will have a huge impact on our compute resources.
Just in total amounts of...
exactly. So there was both angles here. There's the algorithmic angle, special algorithm.
And just data rate.
Exactly.
Angle. Yes. Well, it would certainly be useful to know, maybe not this very moment, but as it were, when final science decisions are made, where those bottlenecks will be. I mean, we can relatively easily simulate any one of these scenarios. If they're unrealistic from a data point of view, in the sense that you're talking about, then that's something that will need to be input in sort of those final decisions.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah. Let me say, Lynne, can you bring up again the slide with your timeline? Let me just make a point or two there, if I may. So one of the things that's mentioned is that there is an organization called the Survey Cadence Optimization Committee. That doesn't yet roll off my tongue very easily. This committee doesn't exist yet. You will notice I can never remember its name from one of these meetings to another. And this committee will be set up by the operations director. And as you know, I mean, what's happening is that this whole time corresponds to the time when LSST is making the transition from construction to commissioning / operations. And so there will be, through this time, there's both a commissioning director, Steve Kahn, and Zeljko as his deputy, and an operations director. We have an interim operations director now, Bob Blum, and because there's still interesting discussions about whether this SCOC is under which of these two operations. Is it the operations or project that oversees the SCOC? That you'll notice that the SCOC delivers the recommendations, the LSST operations director, which again, the interim is Bob Blum, but how that will all work and exactly how this all relates to the SAC. There are words in various documents that suggest that this is a subset of the SAC. The SAC is currently a project, is underneath the project exactly what the role of the SAC will be in operations. These are all interesting political discussions, which is closely related to these issues. I don't know, Zeljko, if you want to say more on that front.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Did I say it more or less correctly?
You said it exactly correctly, or to be more precise, you said it consistent with what I thought, but it's not obviously correct.
So that's a bit of a complication. So the SCOC will exist by the time that they have to start thinking about all these things.
Actually, I can comment a tiny bit more. So this survey cadence optimization committee, as you say, is a committee advisory to the operations director. Actually, in the operations plan, there's another group within the operations team whose job it will be to evaluate future-looking simulations of the survey during the survey. I mean, and so one thing we've been thinking about is this is me as someone within the operations team now, rather than with my collaboration chair hat on. I've jumped out for a second. One thing we've been thinking about is, can we get that working group set up early in order to help out with the investigation of these simulations that are being made? And I think, going back to Leanne's point, I think one of the things that team should be doing is looking at the cost to the operating facility of any particular simulated cadence in terms of data processing and so on. So I will take that back to Bob Blum as something for us to think about, and we could even start figuring out whether we could do something in this first round of simulations.
Sounds good, Phil.
Any other questions?
So I will just add that the as Lynne made reference to families of simulations, and that will give us a framework. We the SAC a framework in terms of the recommendations we're going to make. Again, exactly what the dimension, what defines the distinction between different families is a different cadence, different footprint. Is something that we're still thinking about and iterating with Lynne and Peter and Zeljko and others for their feedback. So, again, it's very tempting to think of this as a combinatorics problem and simply say, let's take each of the options and think of each of that people suggested, explore them in a variety of dimensions, and quickly we can invent 10 to the 8th different simulations that need to be that no one could possibly, even if we could run them, no one could possibly digest the results. So we're trying to be a little bit more clever about this. And of course, again, there are some rules that say you can only observe for 10 years, and that's some of the things are more scientifically compelling than others. So that will reduce the dimensionality of the problem considerably. But we, the SAC, have not yet solve that problem completely by any means, and we'll find ourselves continuing to think about that.
Fred, I had a little question for Lynne, if it's okay. Lynne, I apologize. In December, I didn't get to the thing that I said I was going to do, which was gather up all the LaTeX files and start working them into the COSEP. I just wondered if, despite my failure, you had made any progress on this, and whether there's anything that we as science collaboration chairs can do to help get the LaTeX into the COSEP for all of these white papers.
So this is the LaTeX of the 46 white papers you're referring to?
Yeah, that's right. So in the wording of the call, in the call document, there's wording that talks about absorbing the white papers that were submitted into the COSAP. And I think this is a good idea, right? To have it as a compendium of everything that was submitted, if we can. But the technical problem is how do we get the LaTeX files, and then the practical problem is finding the time to put them into the COSAP. I'm just wondering if you've made any progress, Lynne. You're muted at the moment.
Yeah, sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting while I was sharing my screen. So I did ask, first I checked with all the white paper authors if they were okay with making their paper public, and I did ask at the same time if they would send me either the LaTeX or a link to the LaTeX. I believe, I haven't checked thoroughly, but I believe that we do have LaTeX or a link to their location of the LaTeX for most of the white papers. Probably not 100%. So for most of them, yeah, we do have it. I have not made any progress in putting it into the actual COSAP. So that certainly is something that still needs to be done.
That's great, though. I mean, if you could just get them checked in, then I'm sure we could rustle up a band of willing volunteers to help shape them into the V2 COSAP.
Yes, sorry, and can you remind me where the stage is on that? Going to there was an intermediate prep for V2, right? Of the COSAP, and so I think that we still need to do that first stage of prepping for it, right? And I can take the LaTeX that I have and check it in some directory there, and yes, that sounds like a great place to get started.
Yeah, I think any branch would do at this point. We probably do have to merge into master so that we're developing V2 on the master branch, but the main thing is to get hold of the files so we can start working with them, I think. And it sounds like you made a lot of progress. Thank you.
You're welcome. A lot of people worked on it, on their white papers in Overleaf or something, so then they sent me links to their Overleaf, and so it was nice.
So that actually would make it interesting, because we would have a clear separation between the papers that have metrics and the papers that don't, because those were organized in different sessions in the COSAP paper.
That might be something else to tackle in the COSAP. The sections that don't have metrics may need to get metrics, really, basically.
Right. If I remember correctly, we had sort of every section was split into two parts, one that was sort of general ideas and suggestions, and one that was actually things that used metrics and that quantified the science throughput with metrics. Some better than others, of course. But there was already an organization into, things that were ideas up in the air and things that actually had something workable. So by absorbing these papers into the COSAP, they would automatically fall on one or the other side.
Yeah, I mean, all of the white papers did come in with some kind of metric, although for some it was just things like measure how many visits you get in our part of the sky that we're asking for.
Yeah, which was reasonable. That an interesting is, when are the metrics of that flavor and when are the metrics really science? And sometimes the white papers are not science and saying, and we will write this paper as a result of this work, but are in some sense broader that or sometimes more philosophical than that, if that makes any sense. So metrics that do say, get this flavor of data and let's find out how much of that flavor of data we get are in that sense reasonably justified.
Right, and not all sciences are in a stage in which they can tell you what exactly they want to measure and how.
Yeah.
But
That's
that
right.
may not be. They may not mean that science is not worth pursuing.
Right, exactly.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you so much. This was actually super interesting and very helpful.
And needless to say, if there are questions for me that come up in afterwards, just drop me a note, give me a call, and I imagine Lynn, you would feel the same way.
Definitely.
Thank you, Michael and Lynn.
And I do encourage the chairs, with Michael and Lynn's permission, to share the video of the call with the science collaborations. I think anybody in the science collaborations that wrote the paper especially should be super interested.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Bye,
Thank you very
everyone.
much, and we'll see you in a month.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.